Welcome everyone to my channel. I'm Ben. Tonight, we will step into a chilling tale of love, lies, and sudden disappearance. A young woman who trusted a charming stranger online, only to vanish after leaving home in a hurry, never to return. What truly happened on that deserted road remains a haunting mystery. The countryside, at the edge of Chi County, looked like a place time had forgotten. Hills folded into one another. Fields stretched in patient squares, and the canal that borrowed strength from the Yellow River moved with a muted, gray insistence. On the late morning of June 30th, 2014, a local man stepped onto a narrow iron footbridge to cross that canal. From the center of the span, he noticed something bloated, drifting near the concrete embankment. Too large to be a sack and too shapeless to be a boat, curiosity tugged him across. He climbed down, followed the bank, and then the shape clarified in a way that makes the heart plummet before the mind can form words. It was a human body, face down. The back of the shirt ballooned like a white pouch. He called the police with hands that would not stop trembling. Officers from Chihei arrived fast, slipping into the knee-deep water where mud slurped at their boots. The first look told them more than anyone wanted. Long hair, a young woman's clothing, and wrists forced behind the back. Around the neck, ugly bands, electrical cord, and brown packing tape bit into waterlogged skin. The shallow canal could not hide what violence had already declared. Seasoned investigators know to distrust neat assumptions, so they briefly entertained a grim scenario they sometimes see: those determined to commit suicide who tie their own hands as a last, cruel insurance against backing out. But self-binding, when it happens, is almost always in front. You can wedge a knot between teeth and fingers, clumsy but possible. Hands cinched behind the spine are a different language, one that requires another person. The detectives set that possibility aside. This was a homicide, and the canal was almost certainly just the dumping ground. The more they studied the scene, the more another fact emerged. The restraints were loose, and there were no tarps, sacks, or plastic sheeting wrapped around the remains. That meant the killer had confidence and a covered vehicle. You do not carry a body openly down a public road without drawing eyes. You enclose. You hide. You move where no one can see. The car, van, or small truck was not just likely, it was nearly certain onshore. The young woman looked heartbreakingly small. The estimate barely into her 20s hurt to say aloud. No ID, no phone, no purse. The absence hollowed out the first hours. Without a name, a case cannot begin to circle its suspect. Investigators started their usual two-lane road. One lane led back through official channels, recent missing person reports across the county, and into nearby Jinan City. The other lane moved outward into the village with paper notices and door-to-door questions. In cases like this, anonymity kills momentum. Every minute without a name pulls the investigation into fog. They took inventory of what the killer had left behind and what the water had not yet taken. The cord was black, common, the kind any worker or handyman could coil in a garage. But the tape was specific. It was that amber-brown packing tape that factories use to seal corrugated cartons. This roll was not the generic kind you buy at a market stall. It looked like stock, branded for a local food manufacturer, a company with a familiar logo, and a distribution line that cut across Shandong's towns. When they peeled a strip off the victim's neck, cardboard fibers clung in a rash of flecks to the adhesive. That meant the strip had been torn from an already sealed box, not unwound fresh. Somewhere between loading and opening, someone had ripped it free, carrying both glue and carton skin into the violence that followed. A lead. Maybe. But leads can be treacherous when they glitter too soon. If the tape had been new from a factory roll, investigators might have narrowed focus to employees with access to the supply. Pre-used tape changes that calculus. Any grocery stockroom, any street vendor, any customer who brought a carton home could handle that exact strip. The brand's popularity cut in the wrong direction. Tens of thousands know, likely millions of packages bore the same signature. You do not door-knock your way through the entire province's snack aisles. Still, the tape taught them something about the killer's clock and mind. He had not arrived rehearsed with a restraint kit. He had scavenged, improvising from whatever lay nearby. A strip clawed off a box. A length of cord pulled from a coil. That suggests hurry and agitation. Someone reacting to a problem that spiraled fast rather than a plan executed with cold, staged precision. Improvisation leaves seams. Seams can split. The body arrived at the canal, in clothes that once signaled ordinary youth, a white, short-sleeved t-shirt, pale shorts, and a white belt now unbuckled. Medical examiners work with care that looks like reverence. They explained on camera, for viewers who would later assume indecency, why the shorts had been cut along both hips. When a body swells in water, tight garments resist and tear skin if pulled. You cut to preserve evidence. You cut so that the dead can still speak. A small, intimate detail bothered the team. The underwear was missing, while the bra remained and the shorts had been put back on. Rape kits would later fail to find evidence of sexual assault. Could this be a clumsy attempt to stage a motive? An imitation of a sex crime strip, then redress crafted to shove detectives toward the wrong corridor? Perhaps. But staging usually screams its intent. Theatrical predators leave literal nudity to shout their lie. Here, the gestures were contradictory. Missing underwear, but belt rethreaded. Humiliation half attempted, then reversed. The image that formed grim and plausible was of a man who intended assault, then recoiled when he realized the victim was no longer breathing. Panic is a terrible editor. You redress what you can. You tie what you must. You flee toward water. There was so much the water could not erase. It could not erase youth. It could not erase the way hands swell where ligatures bite. It could not erase the bone in the throat that sometimes cracks when fingers press too long and too hard. And even without an identity, the landscape began to draw a map. The canal was not an accident of geography. It was an engineered vein that diverted Yellow River water into surrounding farmlands. Later, calculations would speak of current speeds just under 1 meter per second, which is about 3¼ feet per second, numbers that tell you how far a body might drift in 2 days. Those numbers build radii. Radii become search zones. Search zones become roads, cameras, faces. But day one remained stubborn, a nameless victim in a place where the wind could slide under your collar and chill your resolve. The investigators did what they always do when the name is missing. They walked. They stood by school gates, because schools get cameras before farm lanes do. They asked shopkeepers whether anyone had printed a missing notice, whether a father or aunt had been asking for an absent daughter. They sat in a small living room where an aunt explained that the girl she raised like her own had stepped out around early afternoon 2 days ago, saying only that something urgent required her. She had not come back for dinner. A picture frame on the wall reflected the room's single window. In that frame, a young woman with long hair stared in a white shirt that matched what the officers had already seen. You do not need a lab to feel the drag of certainty when clothing, cut, and posture echo the body you lifted from gray water. But in law and in conscience, you do not name the dead by hunch. DNA would have to pin grief to truth. The aunt made the call. Parents who labored far from home packed their bags and began the drive back, hearts already moving faster than any car. What remains at the start is not an answer, but a shape, a silhouette of cruelty drawn by tape, cord, and a canal's indifferent flow. A killer who reaches for whatever is at hand. A car or van whose closed space let death ride where neighbors could not see. A young woman whose last steps left a village lane and pointed toward a road that branches east and west, toward a city that would not save her, and toward a strip of water that tried and failed to keep a secret. The case had shed its first layer of silence. It had not yet offered a name that could be spoken at a family altar. But the investigation was no longer blind. The body had spoken. The tape had spoken. And somewhere, in a house that smelled faintly of dust and cord insulation, a man with shaking hands would soon learn that improvisation is the first thing that betrays you. They could not start with a suspect. They had to start with a name. The young woman lifted from the canal had traveled only a short distance in the water. But in an investigation, namelessness was a chasm. Detectives pushed across it the way they always did, 2 lanes, side by side. One lane ran through official forms and databases for missing person reports filed in Chi-He and in nearby Jinan. The other lane went door to door through Liu Zijiang village, the kind of place where people still nodded to each other from bicycle seats and where a new camera on a school gate felt like a small miracle of modernity. That camera had been installed only 2 weeks earlier, on the afternoon 2 days before the recovery. It captured a young woman in a white shirt and pale shorts walking past the school toward the village entrance. The clip was a blink, just a few seconds, nothing odd, no one stalking from behind. A sliver of normal life snapped off from a day that would not stay normal. Beyond the village entrance lay a crossroad that cut east and west toward the national highway. But there was no camera there. The village ended. The record ended with it. So the detectives did what they called, jokingly, the stomach-powered camera. They talked to people. A farmer working near the road remembered the girl waiting under a tree for a dozen, maybe 20 minutes, pacing and checking her phone as if timing something or someone. Then she was gone. He did not see a vehicle pull up. He did not hear an engine note rise. Memory is faithful only to the moment it needs. The lab worked while the village talked. The autopsy read like a litany of negatives that point to one affirmative truth. There was little water in the lungs, no algae debris in the airways or stomach. Both lungs showed none of the balloon tension that drowns the chest from the inside. Across the neck, deep bruising told a different story. The hyoid bone, the little horseshoe of cartilage that language has to cross, had snapped. She had been strangled, and only later bound with cord and brown packing tape so that a killer could haul her away without a struggle only the dead could not make. The canal, then, was not a place of death. It was a place of disposal. Even the current had something to say. Flow measurements on that irrigation canal ran just under 1 meter per second, about 3 feet per second, and the medical window for time of death pointed back roughly 2 days. Put those numbers together and you do not get certainty, but you do get a radius. That radius curved back toward the confluence, where a small dam marked the border between Chi-He County and Greater Jinan. If someone had chosen a point to let the water do their carrying, the dam would be the place. It meant, too, that the victim did not have to be from Chi-He at all. She could have come from the sprawl to the east. An identity came together in the smallest room, an aunt's living room where a single window painted a photograph with pale light. The aunt explained that her niece had left just after lunch 2 days earlier, saying something urgent had come up. On the wall, a framed photo showed a young woman with long hair in a white shirt that echoed the clothing recovered from the water. The family called the parents home from their jobs in another city. DNA spoke when it arrived. The name was Xiao Lei, 22 years old. Raised by her aunt while her parents worked away, sometimes restless in odd jobs, sometimes back with family when the seasons allowed. The certainty hurt, as certainties often do. With a name, the phone becomes a witness. The records were cruelly tidy. On the day she vanished, a single incoming call to Xiao Lei's number at about 2 in the afternoon connected for a handful of seconds. The registered owner was Wang Qiang, a 31-year-old factory worker in Qihe. He told investigators that Xiao Lei had phoned him first while he was on shift. He could not answer then, so he called back on break. He claimed the line connected, but no one spoke, so he hung up. His version felt like a door half open. Not a lie, not entirely helpful. But camera footage at the plant showed him on the line until late afternoon, and neighbors testified he was at a dinner that ran deep into night, staggering home with help. An alibi is still an alibi, however inconvenient to a detective's instinct. If Wang was not the unknown figure by the tree, who was? Geography pointed the way. From the village entrance to National Highway 308, ran roughly 5 kilometers, about 3 miles, with no local bus service. If Xiaola wanted to go east toward Jinan that day, and logic suggested she did, she had to reach the highway first. People without cars get there by foot, by taxi, if they can find one, or by the old gamble no one likes to write down. A ride from a passing car, the gamble that turns roads into hunting grounds. But there were reasons to look beyond the road, back into the days before the canal. A friend from the old neighborhood, Xiao Wei, phoned Xiao Lei's father about something that would not let go of his mind. The day before she vanished, he said Xiao Lei had borrowed 2,500 yuan, promising to repay the next day. In fact, she had borrowed smaller sums before, often with the same plea and a request not to tell her parents. All of it, she had said, was for a boyfriend named Cao Feng, a handsome young man in uniform, whom the family had never met. The aunt had seen a photograph, sharp jawline, dress greens, the kind of picture that can pass for proof if the heart wants it to. Police checks moved through the bureaucracy like a key through familiar locks. There was a real officer named Cao Feng in the Jinan criminal unit. But he was older, with a family, the kind of man closer to retirement than to the young idol in Xiao Lei's photo. As for the supposed colleague who sometimes came in person to collect the bail money, a man who called himself Wang Yang the name, did not exist in the unit's roster. Still, the friend remembered arranging a cheap inn for the collector one night. Registration records showed a room taken in Xiao Lei's name, and grainy camera images caught a slightly heavy-set man at the counter, face blurred by distance and bad lighting. The bank trail completed what the lobby camera could not. A transfer had gone to the account of one Yang Hua. Cross-references put a face to the account, and that face matched the man in the inn's footage. When detectives sat him down, Yang Hua said the quiet part out loud. He was Wang Yang when he needed to collect, and online, he played Cao Feng, using a voice-changing app to keep the personas apart. He had a wife and a child. He also had a habit, each lie begetting the next, until the web held even its maker. He swore he had nothing to do with the killing. And the worst thing about some denials is that the cameras back them up. Plant footage and dormitory surveillance placed him at work and in bed through the crucial hours. A liar can still be innocent of murder. Back on the road, There remained only the camera at the highway junction, its view set too wide and too oblique to read faces or plates. But it could still tell a story if you watched long enough. Detectives built a workflow, eye-numbing in its patience. List every car that emerged from the village road after Xiao Lei had been seen by the school camera. Mark those that cut across the highway toward a dead-end forest track. Watch what came back and when. One vehicle tugged at the pattern, a white sedan that shot across the junction without lifting its nose, as if late for something unpardonable. It disappeared down a narrow road where few locals bothered to go. A strip that turned to dirt, grew rutted, and finally dwindled into trees. Half an hour later, the same car came back through the frame, still fast. Now headed toward the village again. Past those trees, a footpath threaded to the dam at the Yellow River. Past that dam, the current knew the rest of the way. The timing was tight, but possible tight enough for a grim errand and a return. If you trust the tape and the cord, you think improvisation. If you trust the current, you think dam. If you trust the white car, you think owner. In a poor cluster of villages, there were not many sedans of that make and color. Investigators canvassed the nearby hamlet, cut the list to 2, then to 1, when they learned that one of the pair had left the county 2 days earlier on a tollway trip to Yunnan. The remaining car belonged to a man named Ma Qiang, a thin, quiet worker with no record and no history of violence anyone could name. People like him do not set off alarms by themselves. But cars do not drive to dams in the middle of a summer afternoon by themselves either. Detectives decided to approach him gently and to keep their eyes as open as their questions. The body had spoken. The tape had spoken. Now, it would be a man's turn to see what leaked out when the talking started. She had always orbited between 2 homes. When her parents came back from distant factory job, she stayed with them. When they left again, she lived with her aunt, a modest house on the village lane. On that humid late June afternoon, a little before 1, she said she had an urgent errand, stepped into the sun, and walked the only road that led out of the hamlet. The lane rose past the low walls of an elementary school where, only 2 weeks earlier, a new camera had been bolted above the gate. The image it captured was ordinary, and therefore haunting. A young woman in a white tee and pale shorts crossing the frame, head slightly bowed, the posture of someone carrying worry. No one approached her, no one followed. Then the road forked into the world. One way east toward the National Route 308 and the city of Jinan, one way west toward Qihei County, and straight ahead a dead end swallowed by rice. The crossroads had no eye, no lens, only dust and late-day heat. By evening, when her aunt dialed to call her home for dinner, the phone had gone dark. What followed moved with a hollow efficiency of grief. The homicide team knocking gently. The list of missing persons. The photograph pulled from a frame. Her hairstyle, her clothes so much like the body dragged from the canal. Procedure demanded certainty. Her parents were summoned from Zibo. DNA confirmed what the family had already felt collapsing inside their ribs. The search was over, and nothing was found. Police worked the village the old way, shoe leather and patience. A man named Sue, spreading nitrate onto rice near the entrance, remembered her under a big tree. She paced and checked her phone, the way people do when waiting for someone who is late. He bent back to his field. When he looked up, she was gone. No car was remembered, no plate, only a mood. It was just a moment. He said, "The kind you don't know is important until someone asks you to remember it." Technicians pulled her call records. On the day she vanished, there had been exactly 1 incoming call. just before 2 in the afternoon. It lasted only seconds. The number belonged to a 31-year-old factory worker named Wang Qiang. He would later say she had first called him while he was on shift. During his break, he tapped her number. The call connected. No voice came, and he hung up. Co-workers and neighbors gave him an alibi work until late afternoon. A banquet next door. Too much by Jiu. A stumble home. The tape at the plant showed him clocking out. His words fit the images. The images fit the time. To the investigators, he no longer looked like a hand that squeezed a life away, but like a hinge in time. Proof that something unspeakable had happened to her before 2 in the afternoon. They rebuilt her options at the village edge. Westward, buses to Chi-He came every 20 minutes. If she had wanted that direction, she would have paid a fare, not placed a call. Eastward, Route 308 lay roughly 5 kilometers away, about 3 miles, with no bus on that short stretch. Anyone bound for Jinan typically caught a ride to the highway and flagged a coach. The detectives pictured her there under the late June sun, trying and failing to hail a car, then pulling out her phone to ask a friend for help. While officers mapped road cameras and empty shoulders, her father arrived at the station carrying news that felt like a key. A childhood friend, Xiao Wei, had called to ask after her. He hadn't reached her since the day before she vanished, when she had borrowed 2,500 yuan, about $400, promising to repay it the next day. It wasn't the first loan. She had begged him not to tell her parents. Money had become a quiet current running under her days, and now it was part of the river that took her. Why the rush? Why the secrecy? The story surfaced in pieces and then cohered into a single, bitter narrative. She said she had a boyfriend, a man named Cao Feng. He was beautiful in the photo, a young soldier in pressed green. He had a pedigree, she told the family. His parents were military officials. His work was classified. Sometimes he rode a train from Beijing to Yunnan and then boarded planes to elsewhere. After he left the army, he worked in the Jinan criminal unit. It sounded like the biography of a drama's leading man, and it worked because the heart wants stories to be true. When investigators called the Jinan unit, they found a real Cao Feng, but he was a man past 50 with a wife and a daughter older than the victim. The photo she cherished had been plucked from the internet. The dream's details had fooled her because they had been curated for that purpose. The boyfriend's colleague, a man who called himself Wang Yong, had once accompanied her to Xiao Wei's restaurant when she needed cash. He wore the calm of authority. He said he would carry the money to Jinan. It was late. Xiao Wei recommended a cheap, clean guest house 200 meters away, about 220 yards, and the man checked in for the night. The registry held her name only. She had rented the room for him. The camera at the desk caught a stocky figure beside her, a blur too soft to be a face. In the days that followed, money flowed not only hand to hand, but also account to account, sometimes to her, sometimes directly to a bank card under the name Yang Hua. When the police ran that name, the database returned a face that looked uncomfortably like the man in the grainy guesthouse video. The circle began to close. By the time the officers entered the small factory where Yang Hua worked, they already suspected what he would admit. He was the colleague named Wang Yong, and he was also the boyfriend named Cao Feng. He had used a voice changer to tilt vowels, to wear 2 masks at once, whispering sweetness from one account and collecting cash with the other. He told them his marriage was cold, that online flirtations filled a silence he could not bear. He told them the lies had grown like vines, each covering the last until he could not see the wall anymore. He said he only wanted money, and the heat of attention. He did not want anyone dead. In the interview room, remorse can be part confession and part strategy. He wept and said he had pushed her toward that last desperate errand. If he hadn't invented a detention in Jinan, if he hadn't insisted on urgent bail, she wouldn't have rushed to the road, he said. It was a neat moral argument that also kept his hands clean. In the detective's notebooks, the case was now 2 cases. The small one of fraud, the large one of murder, and both shared a single victim. But frauds often leave debris a killer can use. Cash move. Trust bends. A woman goes to meet a promise and instead meets someone else's opportunity. Look again at the timeline. Near 1 in the afternoon, she left the house and walked past the school. She paused beneath a tree by the road, restless. At some point, she climbed into a vehicle. When Wang Qiang's return call connected near 2, the phone opened to emptiness. The investigators considered a possibility that nested inside the emptiness. Perhaps the person beside her, driver or passenger, tapped the screen by mistake as the ring startled them. If that were true, then the last sound in the call log was not the victim's voice, but the breath of the person who would end her life. Around the village, people spoke softly about what had happened. Farmers at the communal tap shrugged into a silence that masked anger. An old woman, folding quilts in the courtyard, said the girl had been too trusting. But then she paused, looked at her hands, and admitted that when you are lonely, a kind voice is a kind of shelter. The officers kept their tone level, but they grew sharper with each hour, following thin lines. A roadside camera here, the narrowing of a timestamp there, the stubborn habit of routes people take when they seek the big road. They knew the canal carried bodies only after someone else had done the worst. They knew the tape around the neck and wrists had been torn from a branded food carton, already used, meaning anyone who bought the company's products might have a strip like it stuck to a garage wall. That clue widened the world of possible hands instead of narrowing it. What, then, did narrow it? Proximity, habit, and courage, the ordinary heroism of paying attention. The team built a map of who drove what and when. They marked shift changes, meal times, and feverish errands. They cross-checked vehicles large enough to conceal a body with drivers accustomed to the short run to Route 308. They returned to the guest house clerk, who remembered little more than a shape and the air of officialdom. They re-interviewed Xiao Wei, tracing each loan, each moment when colleague Wang Yang arrived to collect. From 100 trivial details, a path began to show, the way a trail appears when grass is bent the same direction by many feet. And always, beneath the procedure, there was the human story. Impossible to subtract. A young woman who wanted something to be true so badly that she gave it money and time, and at the end, her life's remainder. A man who wanted to be desired more than he wanted to be decent. A place where roads converge without a camera, where the afternoon can swallow a person in the space between one call and the next. The detectives kept working toward an answer that could carry both cases at once. They would need the patience to hold a fraud and a murder in their hands and see where the fingerprints overlapped. They would need to listen for a voice that had learned to be 2 voices and then follow the seam where the masks met. And they would need to find, somewhere on the short run between a school gate and a highway, the car that opened its door and did not mean to take her anywhere she could return from. The detectives went back to the only thing that moved in this case besides the water, the clock. In the clock, there was a name, Wang Qiang, and in the name, there was a slim chance of a path forward. He did not look like a killer when they met him. He looked like a man pulled from a shift, palms scuffed by work, He said he had not seen Zhao Lei in a long time. He said that on the afternoon, she vanished. He had been at the factory until late, then at a neighbor's banquet, until the hour when men begin to need an arm to get home. Cameras at the plant showed him on the floor until 5 in the evening. Witnesses recalled him weaving back across the lane around 10 at night, drunk enough to sleep through the next morning's alarm and call his supervisor to ask for leave. It was not the picture detectives wanted, but it was an alibi that checked out. There was the phone, though. The records showed one incoming call to Xiao Lei just before 2 in the afternoon, connected for only a handful of seconds. Wang Qiang explained that she had tried him earlier while he was on shift. On his break, he tapped her number back. The call connected, and no one spoke. He thought the signal was bad and hung up. He had assumed, a little guiltily, that she might want a favor or another small loan. When the silence answered him, he felt relieved to let the matter slide. He never met her that day, he said. The clock agreed with him, even when the detective's instinct did not. The more they listened, the more a small contradiction pressed outward. He and Xiao Lei had known each other better than long time no see suggested. They had once tried to date, and then decided it did not fit, but they still talked now and then. He owned a small light truck. Only a few days before the murder, he had driven her from her aunt's village, Liu Zizhang, back to her parents' old home in Shaoyang, just a short ride across the county. Why had he not mentioned that the first time? Because he had a girlfriend now, he said, and the girlfriend could be jealous. The ride, he insisted, meant nothing. He did not want unnecessary trouble. It was a small lie. But small lies are often the kind that make detectives stay a little longer in the room. Parallel to the interview room, the village continued to speak in its slow way. The only road out of the aunt's house ran past a primary school, where a new camera had been installed 2 weeks earlier. It caught a few seconds of a young woman in a white shirt and pale shorts, head bowed, walking toward the village entrance. Beyond that point, the world divided into 3 options: a straight-ahead farm lane that ended in rice, a turn west toward Chihe County, and a turn east toward National Highway 308 and, further on, Jinan City. No camera watched the crossroad. There are places that are blind by chance and places that are blind by habit. This one was both. If she had needed to go west, she could have waited for a county bus. One came every 20 minutes. East was different. The highway lay roughly 5 kilometers, about 3 miles beyond the village, and no bus ran that short connecting stretch. People walked, called a friend with a car, or tried their luck on the shoulder and waved down a ride. On that afternoon, under late June heat, Xiaole waited beneath a tree for 10, perhaps 20 minutes, pacing and checking her phone as if counting someone else's time. When the farmer who noticed her looked up again, she was gone. He did not remember an engine note, a license plate, or even the color of a car. He remembered only a mood. Sometimes that is all a witness can keep. The phone record returned to claim its weight. Around 2 in the afternoon, Wang Cheng's return call connected, and there was only air. The investigators began to sketch a possibility so small it almost felt ungenerous to write down. What if Xiao Lei was already in a vehicle then, and the person sitting beside her, driver or passenger, fumbled at the sound of the ringtone and brushed the screen with a thumb? A connection without a voice is not an accident by itself, but paired with everything else, the waiting by the tree, the lack of buses to the east, and the urge to reach the highway, it sounded less like a glitch and more like the outline of danger. If you cannot see the car that stops, you return to the errand that pulled someone out the door. The aunt remembered the words, something urgent. The urgency came into focus when Xiao Wei, a friend from the old neighborhood, phoned Xiao Lei's father. He had not been able to reach her since the previous day, he said, when she had borrowed 2,500 yuan, about $400, promising to pay it back the next morning. It was not the first time he had been asked to keep the loans private. He had refused at first, then given way when she begged, promising to repay double if necessary. Urgency, then, had worn the familiar mask of debt and a deadline. The reason for the debt was a story with a handsome face. She had said she had a boyfriend, Cao Feng, who worked in the Jinan criminal unit after service in the army, with parents of rank and missions that sometimes stretched to the edge of the map. She kept a photo, a beautiful young man in dress greens. The detectives called the unit. There was a real officer named Cao Feng, 50-something, with a family, nearer to retirement than to the image in her phone. The lovely picture belonged to the internet. The man belonged to a lie. There was, in the lie, a colleague who sometimes came in person to collect money when there was no time to wire it, Wang Yong. He called himself. He wore composure like a uniform. On one late night, when he and Xiao Lei needed a bed in town, Xiao Wei pointed them to a cheap, clean guest house 200 meters away, about 220 yards. The registry captured only her name. She had rented the room for him and left. The lobby camera caught a stocky silhouette, a blur that looked like a person and nothing more. Later, as investigators pulled bank records, one transfer after another led not only to Xiao Lei, but also to an account under the name Yang Hua. The face attached to that account looked markedly like the blurred man in the guest house video. The web tightened. Yang Hua, when he was brought in, said what men like him often say, that he was Wang Yong in person and Cao Feng online, that he used a voice-changing app to keep the characters separate, that he had a wife and a child and a loneliness that made him hungry for attention. He admitted the fraud. He denied the killing. Cameras at his factory in the dormitory covered the hours the homicide must have taken. Sometimes, a liar does not kill. Sometimes, he only builds the bridge that a killer crosses. Back at the village edge, the investigators gathered what the landscape had already taught them. The canal had not killed her. The ligature marks and the broken hyoid said hands had done that. The tape wound at the neck and wrists had been torn from a branded food carton that countless households in Shandong had touched. Those details widened possibilities, even as they suggested haste and improvisation. What narrowed them now was habit, who drove the short run to National Highway 308 as a matter of routine, who could offer a ride without attracting attention, who moved back and forth between the village and the road that led toward Jinan. From those habits, a white sedan would soon step into the frame. But for the moment, the detectives let the phone keep saying what it had already said, that the last connection was a silence, and that silence had a witness none of them could yet name. They went back through Wang Qiang's timeline, not to suspect him, but to sharpen the hour the crime had room to breathe. He had worked until 5 in the evening. He had stood in a neighbor's lighted courtyard and carried platters. He had drunk and laughed. By 10 at night, needed help to cross a narrow lane. His day did not hold the violence that took hers. But earlier, between the tree and the call at 2, between the road with 3 mouths and the world beyond the crossroads, someone else's day did. All that remained was to find the car that opened a door and did not bring her back. They returned to the hour when the case seemed to inhale and hold its breath. A few minutes before 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the record said the victim's phone rang. Connected, then kept a line open for only a dozen heartbeats. No one spoke. It felt like a pocket dial from fate. The working theory hardened with each pass over the transcript. The person beside her, driver or passenger, fumbled at the ringtone, tapped the screen by mistake, and in doing so left a smear of time the investigators could touch. Whoever drove that road to the city did not pass many eyes. Between the village edge and either the highway toward Jinan or the back way to Chihi County, cameras thinned to almost none. One here, another far off. Both set too high and too far to pull a face from glass. The case was not only about a person, it was about distance and angles and blind corners that seemed designed by habit, not malice, yet useful to both. What had sent her out of the door with the words "urgent matter" on her lips? The aunt could not answer beyond those words. The answer arrived the way answers often do in rural places, via someone who called someone's father to ask a simple question and found a police station on the other end of it. Xiao Wei, an old neighbor and boyhood friend, had tried her number for days. He learned at last while speaking to her father that she was dead. Then he said what he had not wanted to say before. On the day before she vanished, she had borrowed 2,500 yuan, about 400 US dollars, promising to pay it back the next day. It was not the first time she had asked him to keep the loans quiet. He had kept them quiet, and now wished he had not. The father, a man who had watched his child become an adult, mostly from the distance that hard work imposes, felt the ground shift under him. Pieces that never asked to be placed on the board, pride, debt, secrecy, now arranged themselves into a picture he had to hand over to strangers. The police took down Xiao Wei's story and wrote a line the aunt would remember later. Urgency had the shape of money. Officers went to find Xiao Wei where he was easiest to reach, his small restaurant in Qi. He was busy, the kitchen hot, the floor crowded. Among the victim's friends, he was the one whose life looked steady. Income, routine, a partner to share bills with. He had not seen her that week. He said he had wired the money because she begged and because she promised to return it the next morning when her boyfriend was released. The total bail, she had said, was over 10,000 yuan. Her boyfriend's family had raised most of it. What remained was exactly 2,500 yuan, due before late afternoon, or the chance to bring him home would be lost for another day. He believed her because, until someone proves they are lying, you believe the people you grew up with. The detectives followed the logic of the errand. If the bail had to be paid over there, she had to reach the highway first to go over there. If no one she trusted could drive her that day, she might have raised her hand for a stranger's car, as so many people did on that stretch, walking the 5 kilometers, about 3 miles to the main road if she had to. Because time was money, and money had become time. When officers looked again at the map, the emptiness along both routes glowingly explained the silence of the tape. No clean shot from a lens, no plate to pull, no witness who saw her open a door and slide into a seat. Only a farmer remembered her beneath a tree, restless in the heat, eyes on her phone. Then she was gone. They sat Xiao Wei down with a pot of tea gone cold and asked about the boyfriend. Name: Job. Anyone who could vouch for him. He did not know the man. None of her friends did. The only family member with more than a rumor was the aunt, who had been trusted with a single photograph. A young man, too handsome to be real, standing in green dress uniform, chin lifted as if the camera were an inspection. She had introduced him to the household in absentia as Cao Feng, a soldier turned detective, now working with the criminal unit in Jinan, with parents of rank and assignments that demanded silence, trains at odd hours, and trips that sometimes left the map of China for elsewhere he never visited. He called at night. He wanted secrecy, which he called safety. And she believed him, because love calls secrecy a kind of intimacy until it doesn't. The team in Chi. He called the team in Jinan. The Jinan team called back with a fact that sounded like a joke in poor taste. Yes, there was a Cao Feng in their ranks, but he was past 50, with a wife, with a daughter older than the victim, and with eyes on retirement, not romance. The photo in the aunt's phone belonged to the internet, not to the officer. Reality, as it tended to do in this case, split neatly in two. The name was real. The face was fake. The investigators allowed themselves a hard conclusion. The urgent matter was a story. It had used the weight of the state prison, bail, deadlines to make a private heart race. It had used a uniform to make a promise look like duty. It had used distance to make accountability vanish into the heat shimmer over asphalt. And yet, the story had left fingerprints in places where stories rarely do. Transfers and wires. Calls with timestamps. A friend with bank receipts he did not want to show, but did because the alternative was worse. They gathered these small, stubborn facts. Xiao Wei had sent the money exactly as she asked. He had done so reluctantly, because she had borrowed before and repaid slowly. But he sent it because she promised to return it the next day, double if needed. That promise had a deadline, and deadlines make people stand under trees and look at their phones and step into cars with doors already open. The officers did not call Xiao Wei a suspect. They called him what he was. The one person close to her who could explain why she left the house that day with a plan she could say in 2 words and not a single detail more. The psychological profile that began to take shape was not of a killer, not yet, but of a manipulator who understood how to build scaffolding out of institutions and climb it towards someone's trust. He used the army to shine. He used the police to scare. He used bail to compress time into a purchase. He used distance to keep his performance safely off stage. If he had an accomplice in the real world, a man to meet in person, a messenger to carry money, a driver to appear at a village edge, he would not look like the photo. He would look ordinary, careful, almost polite, because violence, in this case, had not dressed for the part. It had grabbed and taped and dragged with whatever was at hand, the way a sudden want becomes a crime when opportunity happens to pass, and conscience happens to nap. In the interview room, they asked the aunt to start again. Slower, from the beginning. When did he call? What did he promise? What words did he use for the place he worked and the people he worked with? She told them about the secrecy, about the missions, about the future. He said he could give her niece once things stabilized. She told them about the photograph. She told them she had worried, sometimes, when the house grew too quiet and the girl's eyes stayed too long on the screen. But that worry had felt like the ordinary kind, the kind every parent of a grown child carries and learns to hide. The team split its next steps into 2 streams. One stream reached backward through the social web, old classmates, fellow villagers, anyone who had heard the name Cao Feng from her mouth before, the day she walked out under the sun. The other stream went forward along the money. The 2,500 yuan that left Xiao Wei's account had to land somewhere. If it landed in cash, someone had put a body in a car to carry it. If it landed in a card, someone had used a name that could be asked after. If it landed in a ghost, there might still be footprints around the place where the ghost stood. Both streams ran toward the same idea. Even the best stories shed a scale or 2. The trick is to find them before the river takes them. They did not yet know who opened the car door. They did not know if the car was a sedan with a white roof, a hatchback with a dent, or a van that could hide a shape on the floor. What they knew was narrower and crueler. She stepped toward the city because someone she believed told her to. She reached for money because someone she loved had none. She answered a phone with no voice on the other end because someone who had not planned for the sound of a ringtone pressed the wrong part of a screen. The silence of that call might be the most honest thing the story ever produced. It was not performance, it was panic. And panic, unlike lies, is hard to fake. By the end of that day, the case had added a second crime beside the first. There was the killing that took a body to water. And there was the con that took a heart to a place where logic bends. They could not say yet whether the same hands were behind both, but they knew this. Without the con, there would have been no urgency. Without the urgency, there would have been no tree at the village edge. Without the tree, there would have been no stranger to open a door and say, "I can take you to the highway if you need." The detectives wrote the words "financial motive" in a margin and drew a line from the aunt's photograph to the empty seat where the driver would soon be imagined in white light, then in shadow, then in cuffs. They closed the file for the evening with a name in quotation marks Cao Feng and a small, unglamorous list beneath it: call logs, bank slips, the promise tomorrow morning. When they turned off the lights, the photograph on the desk still looked back with the same stolen beauty. Photographs do not care who they lie for. They only care about light. The line between fraud and homicide was not a line at all. It was a corridor. At one end stood a story, polished until it gleamed. A boyfriend with a soldier's jaw and a detective's badge. Missions that left at odd hours, parents with rank and influence. At the other end lay a canal and a silence that lasted hardly longer than a dozen heartbeats. The detectives walked that corridor again in early afternoon light and found, in the middle, a door left ajar. They began with the con, because the con explained urgency, and urgency explained why she stood at the village edge beneath a tree, restless and checking her phone. The friend from childhood had wired her 2,500 yuan, about 400 yuan, dollars, the day before, told it would complete a bail total and bring the boyfriend out by the next morning. It was not the first loan, only the last. That, the team now knew, was the tempo that pulled her into the heat. The masquerade unraveled with a bank name. From a transfer trail, officers reached an account under Yang Hua. They lifted his file, then his face, and set both beside a blurry hotel lobby camera, where a stocky man stood half-turned while she filled out the room registry in her own name. The frames aligned. Yang Hua was the colleague called Wang Yong. The registry proved her presence. The camera proved his. The ruse had been tidy cash picked up once, later transfers handled through her, but not tidy enough. When they brought him in, Yang Hua admitted what was easiest to admit. He was Wang Yong in person, and online he was also the boyfriend, Cao Feng. He had used a voice-changing app to keep his roles from bleeding together. Sweet words in one mask, official urgency in the other. He confessed to the fraud and the impersonations. He denied the killing, and, for the crucial span, his factory time cards and dorm surveillance did not disagree. Sometimes, a liar does not carry a body. Sometimes, he only builds the bridge that someone else crosses. So, the detectives returned to the road. From the aunt's doorway to the village entrance ran a single path past a primary school where a new camera had been installed just 2 weeks earlier. The lens caught a few seconds of her in a white top and pale shorts, walking toward the crossroads the only way out. From there, 3 options opened: straight into a dead-end farm lane, west toward Cheeha County, with buses every 20 minutes, or east toward National Highway 308, about 5 kilometers, about 3 miles away, where you had to catch a ride or walk. The crossroads had no camera. It was blind by habit and by chance. A farmer working his field remembered her waiting under the tree for roughly 10 to 20 minutes, pacing, glancing at her screen. When he looked up again, she was gone. He did not remember an engine's note, or a license plate, or even a color. He remembered only a mood, the kind that settles in your chest when time is a debt and the clock is a collector. The phone record gave that mood a shape. A little before 2 o'clock, the man named Wang Chang returned her earlier missed call from his factory break. The line connected for only a handful of seconds, and no one spoke. His day was accounted for from the factory floor until 5 o'clock, then a neighbor's banquet until about 10 o'clock. Drunk enough to need an arm home and to call in absent the next morning, and the cameras agreed with his alibi. But the silent connection remained, a thumb's mistake at the sound of a ringtone, perhaps by the person seated next to her. The detectives did not call it proof. They called it a smudge that the rest of the case kept pointing at. If the con had compressed her hours, the landscape had widened the suspect list. The canal did not kill. The hands did. The brown tape had been torn from a branded food carton, so common that any household might have handled it, and the dark electrical cords and fractured hyoid told the same blunt story. She was strangled before the water. The current was measured. The dump point was back calculated. The clothes were described in careful, clinical terms that left no room for wishful thinking. None of that gave a name. It only told the team that the killer had reached for whatever his hands found first. Back at the village edge, they began to ask not who hated her. No one seemed to, but who, by routine, drove the short run to Highway 308, who would be ordinary enough to pull over without drawing remark, who moved between the village and the city in a small car with a habit of being alone in the middle of the day. That question led to a man whose name would later become the answer, Ma Chiang. He had time at noon. He had a car. And when officers arrived at his home one evening and asked him to come down to the station, his body answered before his mouth did. He trembled, his knees unsure, and told his friends at the table a sentence that made detectives listen harder. I might not be coming back. They searched his home. In quick order, they found electrical cords of the same type and color as the cords recovered from around the victim's neck and wrists. A torn carton with tape scars that matched the serrated edges of the strip used on her, and Inti shoved into a kitchen space. A woman's underwear, later confirmed to be hers. Evidence sometimes is an argument, sometimes it is an avalanche. At the station, faced with what could not be argued away, Ma Chiang confessed. He said he had been out of work and sour with himself, that he had driven out aimlessly and, by chance, past the village entrance where she stood under the tree. She raised her hand. She said she needed to reach the highway to catch a coach to Jinan. He told himself he did not want to stop, but stopped anyway because she looked like she had no time to spare. As he reversed to swing the car around, his hand brushed her shoulder. She did not react. Eyes down, on her phone, distracted and unafraid. In that small failure of caution, he felt a surge of want. The plan formed after the impulse, not before it. That, he said, was how it began. The details that followed were ugly, quick, and predictable in the way unplanned violence often is. He used what was at hand: cords, tape, the confined space of a car, to overtake a smaller body. He told the detectives he had intended one crime and ended with another, that panic had replaced hunger mid-act. that the river had seemed like an exit when there were none. No calculation. Only rashness layered on cowardice. The detectives had heard versions of this speech before. They did not believe it, erased the calculation afterwards, the carrying, the wrapping, the drive to a water-engineered borderland, where a canal met a larger flow. They believed only that the impulse might have preceded the plan by seconds. The physics at the canal and the items at his house were more honest than his remorse. If there was a hinge to the case, it was older than the attack. It was the story that placed her under the tree in the first place. Without bail, there might not have been urgency. Without the beautiful face in dress greens and the late-night calls from a man called Cao Feng, there might not have been secrecy that pushed her to keep the loans off the family ledger. Without the colleague who could collect cash, there might not have been a habit of stepping into strangers' cars to make time back. Yang Hua's confession to playing both roles, sweetheart online, messenger in person, did not tie him to the killing. It tied him to the clock that made killing possible. When the team wrote up their notes, they set two crimes side by side. One was the fraud that extracted money with uniforms and titles and an invented life. The other was the homicide that used cords and tape and a canal to erase a body. They said, in a line that read like a verdict on the century, that the first crime recruited the second. They drew a line from the farmer's memory to the silent call at 2 o'clock, to the guest house registry, to the kitchen drawer where the underwear slept under dust. Each point had been a small truth. Together, they were gravity. The photograph on the aunt's phone, the handsome boy soldier she had believed was real, remained what it had always been, light and pixels taken from somewhere else. The officer in Jinan, who truly bore the name Cao Feng, was past 50, with a family and eyes on retirement, not romance. The face belonged to the internet. The name belonged to a different man's life. That clear-cut mismatch would live on as the lesson families gave to each other after the funeral. That secrecy called safety only until it called danger by the same name. Ma Qiang, for his part, read as the kind neighbors never expect. A quiet man, sometimes described as mild. Not the caricature of a predator. People asked how such a person changes. The answer the file proposed was both too simple and too hard. He did not change. He was the same man, and in an afternoon when the world gave him a chance, he chose the worst version of himself. Opportunity is a weapon in the wrong hands. He had a car. She had a deadline. The rest unfolded as if a map had been written for it. In the end, the case returned to the smudge. The phone record left behind. A brief connection at 2 o'clock, in which no one spoke. Panic, not performance, had the sound of that silence. The investigators, who had once written financial motive in a margin and drawn a cautious arrow toward an imagined driver, now wrote the driver's name in block letters and set the arrow down. The corridor between a lie and a killing had a door in the middle after all. They had walked through it. He said it started as boredom. He said his marriage felt like a room without windows. After work, he went home, ate in silence, and opened his phone. He drifted toward chat rooms the way a thirsty man drifts toward a neon sign. That was where he became someone else. He found a photo of a handsome young man in dress greens. He made it his face. He took a name that did not belong to him. He typed as a soldier, then as a detective, then as a man who seemed to exist only at night. It worked too well. She believed, she cared, and once she cared, he began to ask. The asks were small at first. He said there had been a traffic accident. He said he needed hospital fees right away. He said his phone broke and payday sat just out of reach. Later, he said there were English classes, a driver's license upgrade, and then a fight that ended in detention. She lent money again and again. He told himself it was temporary. He told himself it would be the last time. Lies need air. They pull and pull until the truth thins. By then, she had already borrowed from an old neighbor. Xiao Wei, she had asked him before, 2 times, each 2 to 1,000 yuan. The balance lingered. On the day before the disappearance, she asked again, this time for 2,500 yuan, about 400 US dollars, promising to repay the next morning. She told him it would complete a bail total and bring her boyfriend out of detention. Xiao Wei, steady by nature, sent the money and kept the secret because she asked him to. Secrets feel like faith when you love someone. The masquerade deepened. The man online, Cao Feng, had a colleague. That colleague came in person to collect cash. He used the name Wang Yong and a badge that did not exist. The first time, he met her at Xiao Wei's small restaurant. Afterward, checked into a cheap guest house 200 meters away. She used her own ID card to register the room for him. Lobby footage caught a stocky man half-turned beside her at the counter. His face too soft to resolve. His presence too clear to deny. A tidy ruse. Cash, once by hand, later by transfer. When investigators traced a transfer, a name surfaced, Yang Hua. His file looked like Wang Yong's blurred silhouette, and like the man in the registry frames. Confronted, Yang admitted what was easiest to admit. He was Wang Yong, in person. Online, he was also Cao Feng. He used a voice-changing app to keep his masks from bleeding into one another. He confessed to fraud and impersonation. He denied the killing for the crucial hours. Time cards and dorm surveillance did not disagree. Sometimes the liar does not carry the body. Sometimes he only builds the bridge. He said he had planned a clean ending. After he took the last transfer, he told her the bail had been paid and that Cao Feng would be released the next morning. Then, as Wang Yong, he would urge her not to wait any longer. Cao Feng, he said, would disappear with the debt and the story. No more late-night calls, no more borrowed faces. Then she vanished. He insisted it was coincidence. He insisted he had nothing to do with what came next. Even he seemed to hear how that sounded. The corridor between fraud and homicide narrowed around 2 o'clock that day. At a little before 2, she had called a man named Wang Qiang. He missed it on the factory floor. During his break, right at 2, he called back. The line connected for a handful of heartbeats. No one spoke. Then, the call ended. Camera and witnesses held Wang Qiang in place until late evening, drunk at a neighbor's banquet and too sick for work the following morning. He was not the driver, but the silent call stayed on the ledger like a thumbprint, where a thumb should not be. What pulled her from the house had the shape of money and the pressure of time. She left her aunt's place just before early afternoon, walked the only lane that led to the village edge, and passed a primary school gate, where a new camera had gone up 2 weeks earlier. The lens caught her in a white shirt and light shorts. The same clothing recovery would later describe in clinical terms. From the crossroads, you could turn west toward Chihei County, where a bus came every 20 minutes, or east toward National Highway 308. About 5 kilometers, about 3 miles away, where you had to catch a ride or walk. The crossroads had no camera. A farmer remembered her waiting beneath a tree for 10 to 20 minutes, phone in hand, pacing. Then she was gone. He did not see who stopped. He did not hear an engine note. He remembered only a mood, urgency. The evidence in water spoke without names. Brown packing tape had been torn from a branded food carton. It was common enough that it pointed everywhere and nowhere. Black electrical cords crossed her neck and wrists. A fractured hyoid said what no one wanted to say. She had been strangled before the water. There was little water in the lungs. No pond scum in the stomach. This was not drowning. This was an attempt at erasure that misread the physics of flow. Detectives kept 2 pages open. On one, fraud. On the other, a ride to the highway that no one saw. They wrote that Yang Hua's trick had compressed her hours into a deadline. Without the handsome face in dress greens and the late-night calls from a name that belonged to a different man's life, there would have been no secrecy, no urgent borrowing, no walk to the crossroads. But compression is not contact. To say that a lie recruited a killing is not the same as naming the killer. Yang offered an alibi. He said he started his night shift at 1 in the afternoon and stayed on the line through the small hours, then slept at the dorm. The factory's cameras, the time cards, and the dorm corridor agreed. He could cheat a heart from 100 miles away. He could not force a door to open at the village edge at 2 in the afternoon. That was the problem and the temptation of the case. The person who built the corridor between the lie and the canal might not have walked through the middle of it. The team looked again at the aunt's phone, at the photograph of the boy soldier. The real Cao Feng worked in Jinan. He was past 50, with a family and eyes on retirement, not romance. The face in the photo belonged to the internet. The name belonged to someone else. The mismatch became a lesson the family would give to each other across the table long after the funeral. Secrecy calls itself safety until it calls itself danger. They looked again at Xiao Wei's transfers and at the guest house registry line she signed. They looked again at the map between her aunt's front door and the tree where the farmer remembered her. They set the silent call into that map at 2 o'clock, like a black pin. They wrote, in pencil, 3 words in the margin: driver, opportunity, impulse. Then they underlined the first. In the end, the hands on her were not the same hands that typed sweet words and sent bank details, but one set could not have worked without the other. The century's crimes keep recruiting each other. Yang Hua did not cry. He spoke like a man explaining bad weather. He said he felt pressure because she always wanted to meet, and Jinan was not far enough from Chihe to keep postponing forever. He said the lies ran away from him. He said he planned to vanish the very next day, after the release, and return to his quiet life. He said he did not know how she disappeared. He kept saying it, somewhere between the first ask and the last transfer. He had convinced himself that the harm he planned, financial, emotional, the harm of a long-drawn string did not belong in the same room as what happened under the sun at the village edge. The file did not agree. The file married them. At the end of the day, the detectives closed their notebooks with both pages still open. One page had uniforms and titles and a face borrowed from light. The other had cords and tape and a current measured at nearly 1 meter per second. Back calculating a dump point, where a canal met the Yellow River's engineered flow. Names collect in the first kind of case. Physics collects in the second. Somewhere between them stood the tree, the crossroads, and a phone that answered itself for a dozen heartbeats. That was where the story breathed last. They found the first clue to the driver in a place designed for everything except seeing. A county road junction where the village lane met National Highway 308. The camera sat too far, tilted at a diagonal, made for counting cars, not faces. Still, in the hours after she left the aunt's house, one sequence caught their eyes. A white sedan cutting across the highway without slowing, almost clipping a truck, then darting toward a scrubby wood where the paving gave up and the road turned to dirt. 30 minutes later, the same car came back, crossed the highway again, and slipped toward the village. It was a loop with no reason except the only reason that mattered. That wood was not nothing. A footpath from there snaked straight to the waterworks at the Yellow River, an engineered edge with a low dam where the main flow met the feeder canal. That was the very point their back calculation had circled in pencil when they ran the current speed about 0.9 meters per second against a 2-day window of death and drift. The path joined geometry to doom. The camera could not read a plate. Noon glare washed the windshield into a hard white square, but behavior can be as loud as numbers. Who leaves a busy highway for a dead-end farm track at midday, returns within half an hour, and aims back toward the village? Who drives to a place that touches the river in the exact span it would take to go there, do a thing no one should do, and come back? They wrote the words "white sedan" in the margin and began to ask the only question that shrinks a countryside: who routinely makes the short run between Liuzhijiang village and Highway 308 alone around 2 in the afternoon. Parallel to the roadwork, they kept the earlier pages open. The con that created the deadline, the secrecy that pushed her to keep the loans off the family ledger, the late-night voice that called itself a soldier and a detective and borrowed a face from the internet. The friend Xiao Wei had counted the loans now. 2,000 twice. Then 2,500 the day before she vanished. 6,500 yuan in all. Nearly 23 million dong in local terms, all for a boyfriend nobody had met. The first time, the colleague came in person, called himself Wang Yong, took cash, and slept at a cheap guest house registered under her ID. Later, transfers went to a name. The bank turned into a man, Yang Hua. When confronted, Yang admitted the masks, the fake Kaofeng online, the in-person Wang Yong, the voice changer to keep the parts from blurring, and even admitted planning an exit right after the last transfer. Declare bail paid, promise release tomorrow morning, then vanish. He swore he did not touch her and could not have, given factory shift and dorm cameras. Sometimes the liar who builds the corridor between a lie and a killing does not walk through it. Sometimes he only keeps the door unlocked. The water told its own story. Brown packing tape, torn from a branded food carton so common the lead pointed everywhere and nowhere. Black electrical cords at the neck and wrists, a fractured hyoid, lungs that held almost no water, no pond scum in the stomach. This was not drowning. This was strangulation first. Water second. If the dump point was the dam, then a car was not optional. It was essential. Back at the aunt's, the family gave what they had. She had left just before early afternoon, saying only something urgent. A new camera at the primary school gate caught a few seconds of her in a white shirt and pale shorts, walking toward the village entrance, the last clean picture before the world turned to guesses and heat. 2 days later, DNA made the last step official. The body in the canal was hers. What happened at 2 o'clock was the hinge. A worker named Wang Cheng missed her first call on the factory line. On his break, right at 2, he called back. The line connected for just over 10 heartbeats. No one spoke. Cameras and witnesses anchored him elsewhere until the nightly hour when people need an arm home. He was not the driver, but the detectives kept circling that silent connection. A clumsy thumb at the sound of a ringtone, pressed by the person beside her, driver or passenger, would have been enough to answer the call without a word. Panic, not performance, has that sound. So they glued the map to the clock. From the tree at the village edge, it was 5 kilometers, about 3 miles to Highway 308 west toward Chi-He, had buses every 20 minutes. East toward the highway had none. If she needed Jinan in a hurry, she would either walk or raise a hand. Somewhere between the tree and the highway, a door must have opened. Somewhere between the camera and the crossroads with no lens, a white sedan gathered speed. The team returned to the highway camera and watched the loop again. The white car slicing across 308, without slowing, jolting toward the wood and the dirt road, reappearing about 30 minutes later, and crossing back toward the village approach. Then, they walked the path themselves. Down the rut, where the asphalt frayed, through the shade that smelled of sap and heat, to the low dam where the yellow river's flow clashed with the canal. The geometry fit the hour fit the call fit the panic. From there, the case obeyed gravity. They asked who in the village owned a white sedan and ran daytime errands alone. They asked who had cords and tape in the house that matched the marks on the body. They asked who trembled when officers asked him to come to the station and told his friends, a sentence no innocent man speaks before an interview, "I might not be coming back." You already know his name. The search that followed found cords of the same type and color, a torn carton with tape scars like the strip used on her, and a woman's underwear later confirmed as hers. Small truths that, together, weighed like stone. See previous parts, arc. At the table, he said the impulse came first and the plan after, that he'd reversed to turn the car. Brushed her shoulder, and when she didn't look up from her phone, something ugly rose in him. That panic replaced hunger mid-act, that the river looked like an exit when he had none. Detectives had heard this music before. They let the physics of water and the arithmetic of cameras keep the beat. The corridor from fraud to homicide had a door in the middle. The white sedan had walked through it and back in half an hour. Meanwhile, the con kept its place in the story because it kept its place in time. Without bail, there would have been no urgency. Without the beautiful face in a green uniform, there would have been no secrecy. Without the colleague to collect cash once and arrange bank transfers later, there would have been no habit of stepping into cars to catch up with the clock. The real officer who bore the name Cao Feng was past 50, with a family and eyes on retirement, not romance. The photo belonged to the internet. The name belonged to another man's life. Let that be the lesson families give each other long after the funeral. When they closed the file on the 8th day of writing, the detectives stacked two crimes side by side and drew a line between them. The fraud that squeezed hours into a deadline, and the killing that used cords and tape and a dam to erase a body. The line was not straight. It kinked around a camera too far away to read a plate, bent through a wood that smelled of summer, and crossed a phone line that carried only breath, but it held. Stories like this one don't end so much as settle. The water keeps moving. The village goes back to its chores. Somewhere on Highway 308, the noon glare still burns the road white, and in the record, a thumbnail of video shows a car that didn't slow where everyone else does. That is where the truth turned visible. The camera at the junction was never built to tell stories. It sat high and far, angled to count flows of traffic where the village lane met National Highway 308. Its lens washed with noon glare. Yet in the hours after she left her aunt's house, one sequence refused to be ordinary. A white sedan knifed across the highway without slowing, missed a truck by a breath, and plunged toward a patch of thin woods where asphalt frayed into dirt. About 30 minutes later, the same car reappeared, crossed back through the glare, and slipped toward the village approach. A loop, with no reason except the only reason that mattered. Engineers would later say, the path through those trees ran straight to a low dam where the Yellow River's main flow met the feeder canal. The very point detectives had circled when they ran drift math against a current of about 0.9 meters per second, roughly 3 feet per second, over a 2-day window. Geometry met doom at that seam in the water. And if a body was carried to the canal from there, a car was not optional. It was essential. The plate was unreadable. The windshield had been burned into a white square by the sun. But behavior carries its own volume. Who leaves a busy highway for a dead-end farm track at midday, returns within half an hour, and heads back toward the village? Who takes the exact span it would require to reach the dam, do what no one should do under that light, and return to the grid? The team wrote 2 words in the margin: white sedan, and went looking for the driver. There was a complication in plain sight. The handle on the suspicious car should have been black. Yet on the video, it flashed the same pale tone as the bodywork. The answer belonged to optics, not mystery. Under the hard noon sun, and at that distance, a black handle kicked back the car's silver-gray body color. What should have been contrast became a mirror. That optical trick put one particular white sedan, one owned by a man named Ma Chang, back into focus. Ma Kang was unemployed then, a former construction hand with a garage full of wire and tools. His wife worked in the next county. Gone from morning to evening, midday found him alone. That fit the window. The more they looked, the tighter the circle drew. Cords like those at the victim's neck and wrists. A torn carton whose tape scars matched the brown packing tape used on her. Even a woman's underwear hidden in the kitchen, later confirmed as hers. The story was already heavy before he spoke. They had come to the house in the evening, ostensibly to ask for help. At the door, he trembled, legs unsure, and told his friends a sentence no innocent man rehearses: he might not be coming back. The search began before the echo of that line died. Within hours, the evidence lay on the table, and at the station, his confession followed. He said the impulse came first, the plan after. He said he was driving, unsettled, when he saw her at the village edge with a white shirt and pale shorts, phone in hand. Urgent. She raised an arm. He stopped. He told himself he was helping. He described the smallest contact, a brush of his hand, as he reversed the car to turn out. He apologized. She did not look up. She was still typing. That indifference drew something rotten to the surface. He reached again, this time on purpose. She understood and lunged for the door. He dragged her back. The lane was empty. The highway still lay ahead. The trees held no witness. She screamed. Panic overtook appetite. He squeezed until the sound ended. Strangulation first. Water second. The autopsy would repeat that later, with the flatness of science. He drove her to his house, undressed her, and then froze when she did not move. Only then did he see the finality of his own hands. He dressed her again, clumsy now, and, in that clumsiness, forgot her underwear. He bound her. He put her in the trunk. He drove for the dam. The sprint to the river obeyed the camera's clock. Cross the highway. Take the dirt. Reach the waterworks where the main flow meets the canal. A quick lift over the rail. A drop into the brown. A turn back through the trees. The 30-minute loop came back clean. Panic wears a watch even when no one else does. Afterward, he said, he could not explain himself. He had been out of work since early that year. His health faded. The car loan still bit at the family account. The children were in middle and high school, each semester more expensive than the last. His wife's pay covered the daily bread, but not the pride. He sat with the slow anger of a man day drinking the sense of his own failure. In that state, he said, impulse met opportunity, and borrowed a mask called hunger. His wife, when told the sequence, refused to accept it at first. To her, he was the man who tried, who fed the stove, who laughed at small jokes. She searched his face for the stranger the police had found. She said the pressure must have broken something inside him. The evidence said what it said. The detectives did not close their other pages. The fraud, the lie that gave the day its deadline, still sat on the desk beside the violence. In the months before the killing, a married factory worker named Yang Hua had played two men at once, the beautiful soldier lover on the phone, Cao Feng, and the so-called colleague, Wang Yong, who collected the first cash in person and later arranged transfers. He used a voice changer to keep the masks from bleeding into each other. He told her there had been a fight and detention. He told her bail could fix it. He told her tomorrow morning would be the reunion. Then he planned to vanish. That was the corridor between the white screen in her hand and the white sedan on the road. She had borrowed twice for 2,000 yuan, and once more for 2,500. The day before she vanished, 6,500 yuan. In all, roughly 23 million dong, promising repayment tomorrow morning. The habit of secrecy was already formed. She told her old neighbor, Xiao Wei, not to tell her family. That secrecy kept the clock running and put her on the lane at the village edge just before early afternoon. The fraud did not put hands on her, but it put hours around her. At 2 that afternoon, a small piece of sound tied the maps together. A worker named Wang Cheng, who had missed her call on the line, stepped out on break and called back. The line connected for just over a dozen heartbeats. No one spoke. He went back to work until the evening banquet that would leave him too drunk to work the following day. Cameras and neighbors set him in place. He was not the driver. But the quiet call made sense only if a nervous thumb, not hers, had accepted it at the edge of the road. Panic makes mistakes. Performance does not. In court, science did not indulge metaphor. There was almost no water in the lungs, no pond scum in the stomach. The hyoid was fractured. Black cords circled the neck and wrists. Brown tape from a branded food carton held its own trail of torn fibers. A body cast into the canal was not a drowning. It was an erasure attempted against the physics of flow. Over 2 days, the water brought her from the dam at the county border to the place where a farmer saw what he thought was a bag bloated white in the sun. What remains after the signatures and stamps is a shape, a lie that makes a deadline, a secret that sends a girl to the road alone, a white sedan that does not slow where everyone else does, a 30-minute loop to water and back, and a house with drawers that hold cords and tape, and one small piece of clothing that the killer's fear made him forget to return. Even the camera, meant only to count, caught the rhythm. Out, into the trees, back. In that rhythm, the story ended. When asked to explain, Ma Kong tried to locate the moment where his life forked. He could not. He said boredom. He said money. He said pride. He said the feeling of being useless when the loan bill came. His wife searched for the man she knew and did not find him in the transcript. Somewhere between the first reach and the last crossing of the highway, a person became a driver, and the rest of the village learned how a lens built to watch traffic can end up seeing the truth. The story ends where 2 roads meet, one paved with lies and late-night calls, the other with cords, tape, and a dam under noon glare. In court, the distance between them collapsed into a single judgment. In March 2015, the driver whose loop to the river we traced through cameras and geometry was convicted of intentional homicide and sentenced to death. The man who wore borrowed faces online was arrested for impersonating police and fraud. 2 crimes, 1 victim, and a verdict that could not return what the water took. Before the sentences, The evidence had already spoken in plain language. The autopsy said it first: almost no water in the lungs, a fractured hyoid, black electrical cords at the neck and wrists, brown packing tape, torn from a branded food carton, strangulation before water, erasure after. Not drowning, never drowning. The drift math back calculated the probable dump point to the low dam, where the Yellow River's main flow meets the feeder canal. An engineered seam that turned behavior into a map. That map matched a camera built to count cars, not faces. On the day she left her aunt's home, a white sedan sliced across National Highway 308 without slowing, veered toward a scrubby wood where asphalt turned to dirt, and returned about 30 minutes later, enough time to reach the dam, do what no one should do under that light, and come back. The driver's door handle appeared pale in the footage, though the handle was black in life. Optics, not mystery, explained the trick as sun and distance washed the contrast away. The detail didn't name the man. It narrowed the car. You know the rest of the loop. Cords in a kitchen drawer that matched the cords on her wrists and neck. Tape scars on a torn carton that mirrored the edges used to bind her. A single piece of clothing the killer's panic forgot to return. Evidence, lined up end to end, becomes gravity. It pulled the driver from his doorway to an interview room, where his body confessed before his mouth did, and then his mouth followed. The court's pages, though, lay side by side with another file. A fraud that recruited a killing without ever placing a hand on a throat. Months earlier, a married factory worker had pulled a photo of a young soldier off the internet and wore the name of a real officer, older now. Eyes on retirement like a mask. He played two roles: the beautiful boyfriend online, Cao Feng, and the in-person colleague, Wang Yong, who collected the first cash and arranged later transfers. When pressure built, he invented a detention and said bail could fix it, promising a reunion tomorrow morning, before planning to vanish. Secrecy followed. On the day before she disappeared, she borrowed 500 yuan, bringing the tally to 500 yuan, across several loans to complete the supposed bail. She made her old neighbor promise not to tell her family. The next day, urgency put her under the tree at the village edge, the phone in hand, waiting. Fraud did not push a door open, but it set the hour when a door might. At a little before 2 in the afternoon, she called a man she once knew. He missed it at work. On his break, at exactly 2, he called back. The line connected for a dozen heartbeats. No one spoke. Cameras and neighbors would later account for him until the night's end. He was not the driver, but the silent call sat in the ledger like a thumbprint where a thumb shouldn't be. Panic makes mistakes. Performance does not. The sound of a ringtone, a fumble, a nervous press. The last clear image of her alive came from a new camera at a primary school gate, installed just 2 weeks earlier. White t-shirt, light shorts, heading toward the only crossroads out of the village. A blind intersection with 3 options: west to Chihei by bus, east 5 kilometers to Highway 308, or straight into a dead-end farm lane. The crossroads had no lens. The world turned to guesses. 2 days later, the DNA confirmed what the file already feared. The body in the canal was hers. What we call closure often reads like arithmetic. The optics explain the door handle. The current explains the timeline. The 30-minute loop explains opportunity. The autopsy explains order, strangulation, then water. Together, they explain murder. But cases like this one are also made of sentences that you cannot graph. During interrogation, the fraudster wept and said that although he did not kill her, he had pushed her toward the road that led there. That without the lie of detention and bail, she would not have rushed to find a ride, and fate would not have met her in that window. Contrition does not commute a sentence. It only changes a posture. The commentary that followed the verdict tried to answer the question people ask in every village after a quiet man confesses to an unthinkable act. How can someone mild, even timid, become a killer? Two hypotheses were offered. 1. He had always been good at hiding the worst of himself. 2. Goodness and harm are separated by a decision so small you could miss it. Impulse meeting opportunity on an empty road. In this case, the observation was specific. She did not flinch when his hand brushed her shoulder as he reversed. She was on her phone. She seemed unguarded. He was out of work and alone at noon, and a minute of ugliness became the whole story. None of that absolves. All of it explains. Public safety advice usually lives in the margins of cases like this, but it becomes part of the lesson when the margins get people killed. Investigators and commentators repeated familiar cautions. Be wary in isolated places. Treat closed spaces, rooms, cars as thresholds. Avoid rides from strangers unless absolutely necessary. Keep someone informed in real time. And, above all, treat secrecy as a hazard, not a shelter. The words feel thin until you set them beside a dam and a 30-minute loop. Justice, finally, is not a door you walk through and forget what stands behind it. It is a line on a page. The driver to death for intentional homicide. The fraudster to custody for impersonation and theft by deception. It is also a story the family will tell each other in smaller words. That a phone can turn love into leverage. That a camera meant to count cars can sometimes see the truth. That a canal can carry a body farther than anyone imagines. But not so far that reason can't follow. Cases settle. Water keeps moving. We remember so the next person under a tree at the edge of a village isn't left alone with a deadline. Hearts don't break like glass. They fold like paper, one crease at a time until the shape is something you can't recognize. That's where our story ends and the lesson begins. Two crimes ran on parallel tracks here. A romance built from stolen photos and late-night whispers, and a midday killing on a road to water. The court fused those tracks into outcomes we can name: death for the driver, arrest for the fraudster. But naming outcomes is not the same as learning the pattern. Let's anchor the last truths. Forensics was never ambiguous. Almost no water in the lungs. A fractured hyoid. Black electrical cord on the neck and wrists. Brown packing tape torn off a branded carton. That order strangulation first, water second, tore away the alibi. Of maybe she drowned. It didn't happen. It couldn't have. The current at roughly 0.9 milliseconds, and a 2-day window back calculated a dump point at a low dam, where the Yellow River's main flow meets the canal. Geometry, not gossip. Set the clock. Cameras meant to count cars ended up counting decisions. A white sedan slashed across Highway 308 without slowing. Slipped into scrub where asphalt turned to dirt, and returned about 30 minutes later, the exact time a guilty loop to the dam and back would take. The door handle in the footage looked pale, even though it was black in life. Noon, glare and distance turned contrast into a mirror. Optics narrowed the field. Investigation named the driver. Meanwhile, another file sat open on the same desk. A married factory worker who lifted a young soldier's face from the internet and wore the real name of an older officer like a mask. He became Cao Feng at night and a colleague by day, collecting cash once in person and routing later. Transfers to himself? When pressure to meet mounted. He invented detention, promised bail would fix it, and planned to vanish tomorrow morning. That corridor of secrecy compressed the victim's hours into a deadline. The day before she disappeared, she borrowed 500 yuan, bringing the total to 500, across several loans for a boyfriend no one had met. She told her friend to keep it secret from family. When she left the house the next afternoon, she was under a tree at the village edge with a phone in her hand and urgency in her step. Fraud didn't open a car door, but it set the hour when a door might. At precisely 2:00 p.m., a man she knew called back after missing her earlier ring. The line connected for just over a dozen heartbeats. No one spoke. Cameras and neighbors later placed him far from the road until late-night drunkenness put him to bed. He wasn't the driver. The silent call only makes sense as panic. A nervous thumb, accepting a ringtone it shouldn't. In a moving car it shouldn't have entered. The last clean image of her alive came from a primary school gate camera installed 2 weeks earlier. White shirt, light shorts, walking toward the blind crossroads that split west to Chihei, east 5 kilometers, to Highway 308, or straight into a dead-end farm lane. The crossroads had no lens. 2 days and a long drift later, DNA said what everyone feared. The body in the canal was hers. Those facts closed the case. But our channel, Unraveling Mysteries, doesn't stop at closure. We look for the seam where prevention could have lived. In this story, the seam was money. When a romance asks for cash, that's not a plot twist. That's the plot. The right response is a hard stop. Always. That's not cynicism. It's pattern recognition. And because it won't happen to me has never saved anyone. Let me give you another story. A gaming group. An entrance of a rich girl studying abroad. Family with supercars. Problem after problem, locked bank card. Late transfer from traveling parents. Broken items to pay for. A plane ticket to buy, little loans that stack to mountains. Friends in the group confirm she's rich. Maybe they're duped. Maybe they're accomplices. The boy in the story grew up with scarcity. Started work at 16 and wanted to believe in a ladder that would lift him. He sent the money. Later, the mask fell. No rich family. No supercar. Only a script. The boy's heart healed slowly. His debt did not. Scams ride 3 levers: scarcity, urgency, and secrecy, and one solvent: flattery. Scarcity says, I can't access funds yet. Just this once. Urgency says, it has to be now. Bail. A ticket. A fee before the office closes. Secrecy whispers, don't tell your family. They'll misunderstand. And flattery paints a perfect partner who improbably chooses you and loves you without meeting you. Beautiful, accomplished, tender, loyal. When all 4 appear in one message thread, you're no longer in a love story. You're in a heist. Look back at the case and count how many times each lever was pulled. So here are hard rules, the kind that keep you alive and solvent. If they ask for money, hit the brakes. Loans, bail, urgent fees, blocked cards, refunds that need a pass-through transfer. It's all the same melody. You don't debate a red light. You stop. When someone's life looks like a movie, military hero, detective, heir to a fortune, but somehow they love you, sight unseen, treat that as a plot device, not a fact. Beauty, rank, and devotion rarely arrive as a bundle in a blind inbox. Rare is not never. But con men live in the margins, where rare excuses impossible. Move relationships out of text. Video call early. Refuse no camera excuses. Verify workplaces by calling official numbers you look up yourself, not links they send. If identity matters, ask for a photo holding today's date next to a neutral object. Masks prefer the dark. In our case, the real Kaofeng was a middle-aged officer headed toward retirement, not the youthful face on the screen. Tell someone you trust. Secrecy is gasoline. Loop in family or a friend. Fraud shudders in daylight. Our victim hid loans and plans even from the closest people in her orbit, and the clock ran faster because of it. Treat cars and rooms as thresholds. Don't ride with strangers when you are alone and pressed for time. If you must, send the plate and a live location to a trusted contact. Call them while you ride, and say the driver's name out loud so the driver hears you reporting it. Cases aren't made of advice, but the morgue is full of people who didn't get any. The loop to the dam took 30 minutes. Think about how much prevention fits inside 30 minutes. Believe physics. Panic leaves fingerprints, like a silent call connecting for a dozen heartbeats in the wrong hands. If something about your day doesn't feel like yours, abort it. Go home. Walk into a shop. Ask for help. The world is noisy. Your life shouldn't be silent on the line. There's a detail that lingers after verdicts. The fraudster cried in interrogation. He said he never meant for her to die, only to take her money and attention. He said his lies pushed her onto the road where fate found her. He said he was sorry. That's not exoneration. It's a map of harm. Fraud and murder are separate squares, but the bridge between them is real. Don't step on it. And the driver? Communities asked the usual questions. How can a mild, even timid, man turn into a killer? 2 answers repeat across casework. 1. He always was, and he hid it. 2. He wasn't, and he made one catastrophic decision. When impulse met opportunity, neither answer raises the dead. Both remind us to build frictions into our lives, so that impulses trip and fall before they do damage. If you only keep one thing from Unraveling Mysteries tonight, let it be this: love that wants secrecy is leverage, not love. Love that needs you broke is bondage, not love. Cameras can catch the arc of a car. Currents can carry a body, but only boundaries keep a life. We tell these stories not to wall you off from the world, but to give you better doors. Close the ones that whistle with promises. Open the ones that lead to light. Stay curious. Stay skeptical. And if anyone, no matter how handsome the avatar, how noble the uniform, how urgent the plea asks for money, end the story there. That's not a twist. It's the tale of the fox,